supermoon, part 2. This is coming off of the lunar maximum. So it's, let's see, I think it's like 99.6 right now. Still full phase, rising in the east. Let me lower this volume a little bit. How's everybody doing? Ellie, good to see you. Missed you yesterday. What's up there, Tom? What's up, Sabian? What's up, Dagger? What's up, Los Brooklyn? How you doing, Vision? Hey man, thanks so much for the donation. I appreciate that. Saw that this morning. Always appreciated. So I was looking through some links today. I found a few pages that we can read from that essentially analyze the text from yesterday. You're gonna have to forgive me, I'm a bit congested today. I think allergies got to me. So I know how, if I don't sound clear, let me know, I can repeat myself. What's up, Mary? Evening. Ellie, you heard the stream, that's awesome. Yeah, it was really fun to kind of go through that text. It kind of finally sunk in. And the stuff that I found today actually talks about it in the same way that I was trying to analyze it. Take a couple of still shots. There's a bit of blurriness in front of the moon, that's the trees. In fact, maybe I should do a little bit of a tree shot real quick while we have the opportunity. Always looks pretty. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Sabian Geometry says, was just finishing my full moon journal entry when I got this notification. Nice, what were you writing about? Like astrological stuff or just thoughts about the moon? Vision says, last night's show was like icing on my day. It's awesome. I actually, honestly, right after the show, I I worked a bit and then I put on the show and tried to listen to some of it. I wanted to see what I sounded like actually when I was reading stuff. It was definitely fascinating. I don't think I've ever read anything that long. I've never orated. I haven't done it since high school. So that was quite interesting. So this whole idea of, essentially these texts from the past that discuss the moon, I decided I'm going to just look up a few of them and we're going to talk about them tonight. I have like 4 or 5 pulled up. Double letter default. Yeah, it's hard to adjust to new keyboards, Viz. I always have that trouble. I finally found 2 that are decent, so I can always have a backup. All right, let me know if you like this view of the tree. I'm gonna leave it for like, what, 15, not like, maybe less, maybe like 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, so let's get going. We got 14 people, we got the regulars. And let me see, so this is probably, let's start with kind of the analysis from yesterday's text, so. Pull this up. So this book, I'm gonna try and find a quick track to sing over, to talk over. All right, this is low, all right. So this book is called Imagining the Unimaginable, The Poetics of Early Modern Astronomy. and I'm just going to jump into the middle of it. I only have a few pages, but essentially jumps into the stuff dreams are made of. Duracotus' mother, Phiox Hilde. Actually, I think I gotta lower this reverb just a little bit. It's nice, but it's a lot. That's a little better, I think. There we go. All right, so keep the dashboard here. All right, so it says, Duracotus' mother, Phiox Hilde, the witch, is a wise but irascible woman who, in a blaze of anger, impulsively pledges her son to the captain of the ship. After a turbulent voyage, Duracotus eventually ends up in the island of Haveen, where Tycho Brahe, Kepler's teacher and employer, is conducting his astronomical observations. For some years, Duracotus remains with the great astronomer, who introduces him to the science of astronomy. Tycho's observations of the stars and the moon remind the boy of his mother, because she too used to commune with the moon constantly. After 5 years, Duracotus returns home and is reunited with his mother. To his surprise, he comes to realize that the wise woman is as wise as Tycho Brahe in her lore of the skies. In some ways, his mother has learned by experience all that Tycho had surmised. She tells Duracotus that she communicates with demons of Levania, or daemons of Levania, the spirits of the moon, with whom mortals at times travel to the distant land. In the company of her son, Phiox Hilde invokes one of the spirits while they both cover their heads with cloths in accordance with the magic covenant. Like, how crazy. It's so cool. Here ends the first section of the dream, or Somnium. The second, longer section consists of the daemon's description in Icelandic of the journey to Levania, the moon, and of Levania itself. In addition to being the transcription of the dream in the book, the dream itself thus also includes a translation of the narrative of the book it contains. Although this narrative is marked as the daemons, or the spirits, the same ambiguity exists between the daemon and Duracotus as between Duracotus and the first narrator. The demon explicitly assumes the human perspective. This ambiguity is emphasized in several ways. By the point that the demons sometimes escorting humans to Levania, and their preference for dried-up old hags, adept in the old lore of demonology, thus recalling Phiox Hilde, as well as the detailed account of the effects the trying journey to the moon has on the body. Moreover, the description of the trip to the moon calls into mind Duracotus' nauseating journey to the island of Haveen earlier in the narrative. The fact that the demons refer to the moon as the Isle of Levania and compares the arrival on the moon to disembarking from a ship and going ashore further underscores this parallelism. In the continuous play of parallels and ambiguities, the various narrative levels keep implicitly referring to each other, and narrative descriptive elements are recycled from one level to the next. Excuse me. So I'm going to take a breather here and just jump backwards. So this is actually, in a way, it's sort of what I was talking about as I was reading it yesterday, as to how the narrative kind of duplicates, and he kind of goes into a lot of science stuff at one point, and then he's really talking about this narrative from all these different perspectives, and it's sometimes really hard to see who's saying what and what about, or how long they go into the scientific detail versus just the overall arching narrative. Jumping back to the stream real quick. Yo, what's up, Vicky? Nice to see you. Did I miss anybody else jumping in? Okay, where were we at? All right, in this third narrative, actually, let me set the focus on the moon real quick. All right. Nice spooky cloud rolling through. All right, I'm going to keep going here. In this third narrative, the focus becomes primarily scientific, as I was saying, albeit not exclusively so, for there are still elements of myth and superstition, such as the piece of Pythagorean demonology, where the demon explains that he and his kindred spirits can only embark on the journey during a lunar or solar eclipse, when the cone of shadow, the umbra, between the earth and the moon serves them as a ladder. As soon as the demons arrive on the moon, they quickly withdraw into caves and dark places to escape the sun, quote unquote. In a further narrative parallel, the demons' flight from the sun and the repeated references to the shadow in the dark places prefigure the plight of the lunar inhabitants, who spend half their lives frantically escaping from the scorching sun. The ambiguity between the identity of Duracotus and the demon thus extends to the lunar inhabitants. In consequence, the demarcation of different perspectives, established on the narrative level through the separation of narrative voices, and, as I laid out in the introduction of this chapter, of central importance to the cosmological argument of the dream, becomes uncertain ultimately. Hey, what's up, Q question stuff? How you doing? Yo, what's up? We don't need no trouble. All we need is love. That was one of the favorite songs of mine when I was a kid. We don't need her in this other key. Rain song. Just going through some texts over here that I found, some pages that are essentially from discussing what I was reading yesterday, the Somnium book by Kepler. So this is a book called Imagining the Unimaginable, the Poetics of Early Modern Astronomy, and doing like a breakdown of Somnium. So I'm about halfway through and he's just talking about how the discussion of the narrative of this book. So let's keep going. Alright, the demon then gives a systematic description of Lavania. The moon is divided into the prevulvan and the subvulvan hemisphere. While the subvulvan always faces the vulva, the lunar name for Earth. There we go, I didn't see this yesterday. So vulva, V-O-L-V-A, is the lunar name for Earth, I guess, is the Lavanian name for Earth. So prevulva and subvulva probably refer to the side of the moon facing us and the far side of the moon. And I would say the subvulvan always faces the vulva. So the subvulvan would be the side of the moon that we're looking at right now. And prevulvan would be the far side of the moon, for clarity. What's up, Carolina? Sky Astronomy, how you doing? All right, let's do this. So that all makes sense now, a little bit more sense actually. The prevulvan remains deprived of this site of vulva, which is Earth. The demon systematically describes various phenomena of the lunar astronomy and points out the differences between the two hemispheres. The prevulvan is mainly characterized by the complete absence of the vulva. This absence, as well as Lavania's proximity to the sun during the prevulvan day, generates an extreme shift in temperature between day and night. The subvulvan, on the other hand, enjoys the great aspects of the vulva, which replaces our moon. Its waxing and waning, as well as the way it turns on its axis, are described very beautifully and in great detail. Finally, the demon describes Lavania itself. Topographically, the lunar world is much like ours, save that everything is bigger in scale. The mountains soar to incredible heights. The fissures and valleys are deeper than the terrestrial canyons we know. And despite Galileo's growing suspicion to the contrary, Kepler believed in the existence of water on the moon, and therefore in the existence of human life. See, this is really where it gets fascinating. I mean, of course, this is this writer deriving what, he wanted, or what he thought Kepler was writing about, probably contextualized in other writings like Kepler, not just the dream. Hey, what's up there, Ben? How you doing? Yeah, it's really, I know it sounds like, it's really hard to make it sound like, unless I say vulva, but that's going to take a lot of, I don't know, it's just going to sound weirder than saying vulva. Almost sounds like some, yeah, actually it does sound Icelandic in a way, but maybe I'm wrong. What's up, C. Smith? I know I keep saying that over and over again. All right, let's do it. So describing Lavania, so Kepler, despite Galileo thinking that there wasn't any water, Kepler thought there was water on the moon, and therefore human life. Forms of life on Lavania have adapted to the topographical environment and the great calamities of the climate. Creatures and the plants are monstrous size too, but their lifespan is brief and seldom lasts more than 1 lunar day. This, I assume, is something like 28 Earth days. Of the 2 hemispheres, life on the subvolvan, which is the hemisphere that faces us, is more bearable for the presence of the vulva and the moon's aphelion position during the subvolvan day. So the moon is at its perigee right now that we're looking at it, and it's at its closest position to Earth, as we know. That happened earlier today. Yeah, totally nerding out, Mary. I see that icon emoji and I'm always like, super nerds. Super lunar nerds. All right, where are we at? Of the 2 hemispheres, life on the subvolvan is more bearable for the presence of the vulva, the Earth, and the moon's aphelion position during the subvolvan day. In addition, a constant cover of clouds and rain give relief from the heat. From this vision, the narrator is suddenly roused by the rattle of rain to find out it was all a dream, that he's laying in his bed, head really covered with the pillow and the cloth, and his body with blankets. Yeah, this is where, like yesterday when I was reading and it kind of abruptly ended, the book was actually quite short, and it's always like just where you really want him to get into, what was going on with what it looked like from the surface of the moon. They kind of get it cut off. So 3 elements receive special prominence in the narrative of the dream and are continually played off against each other: the book, the dream, and the journey. The 3 elements mutually contradict each other. The physical journey to the moon conflicts with the dream vision, and this in turn with the dream as the book or literary dream. They can only exist next to each other through ambiguity. At the same time, each of them relates to the content of the dream in a particular way. It is either constitutive, that's interesting. It is either constitutive of its argument, or sorry, I just got stopped there, or it reflects on its mode and validity of representation through critical distancing. That went super literary analysis for a second. My discussion will focus mainly on the concept of blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm just skimming this for a second and seeing. And there's really a lot. But I'm kind of reading from scanned pages, so it's quite difficult to really make out. All right, this is one part of the analysis. Let me hop in the chat real quick. Mo P, what's going on? I could read from How to Mix Concrete. First, you bring the dust. You lay the clay. Slowly swirl the water until sounds. What's up, V-Smart, the vulva nerds? Oh, so they're driving a Volvo around the moon, essentially. That's what they're talking about. Big ad for VW right here. Didn't VW buy Volvo? Volvo is not an independent company anymore, right? Volvo owner. Oh, it's Geely? The same year Volvo sold Volvo Air to the British company GKN. So Volvo Cars Geely became the largest. Okay, so I guess not. I'm just messing here. What's up, MLG Vlogs and Gaming? Sup? Do some ASMR. I'm sort of, I try and keep it ASMR-like, but talk about some stuff. So, okay, I'm gonna jump from analysis of Somnium, the dream, to this other piece of ancient text that I found. I've seen over the years, and I kind of read to myself, but I've never really brought it up. Yo, what's up there, Tammy? Good to see you. Okay, so there's an article from varchive.org, and it says Earth without the moon. And it's a short article that I'm going to just read right now. And yeah, I'm not trying to, this is not a lecture about anything or my vantage point. I'm reading some of these things for the first time. This is something I've read a long time ago that I thought was really interesting. All right, the Earth without the moon. The period when the Earth was moonless is probably the most remote recollection of mankind. Democritus and Anaxagoras taught that there was a time when the Earth was without the moon. Aristotle wrote that Arcadia in Greece, before being inhabited by the Hellenes, had a population of Pelasgians, and that these aborigines occupied the land already before there was a moon in the sky above Earth. For this reason, they were called the Proselines. Apollonius of Rhodes mentioned the time when not all orbs were yet to be in the heavens, before the Danaian, Deucalian races came into existence, and only the Arcadians lived, of whom they said dwelt on the mountains and fed on acorns before there was a moon. Plutarch wrote in the Roman Questions, quote, "There were Arcadians of Evander's following, the so-called pre-lunar people," end quote. Similarly, wrote Ovid, quote, "The Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Jove, or Jupiter, and the folk is said to be older than the moon." Hippolytus refers to a legend that Arcadia brought forth Pelasgus, or greater antiquity than the moon, of greater antiquity than the moon. I guess that would be a secondary planet or a secondary moon. Lucian, in his Astrology, says that the Arcadians affirm in their folly that they are older than the moon. Censorinus also alludes to the time in the past when there was no moon in the sky. Some allusions to the time before the moon may be found also in the scriptures. In Job 25:5, the grandeur of the Lord who, quote, "makes peace in the heights," is praised, and at the time is mentioned, "before there was a moon and it did not shine." Also in Psalm 72:5, it is said that thou wast feared since the time of the sun and before the time of the moon, a generation of generations. A generation of generations means a very long time. Of course, it is of no use to counter this psalm with the myth of the first chapter of Genesis, a tale brought down from exotic and later sources. The memory of a world without a moon lives in oral tradition among the Indians. The Indians of the Bogota highlands and in the eastern Cordilleras of Colombia, Cordilleras of Colombia, relate some of their tribal ritual reminiscence to the time before there was a moon. In the earliest times, when the moon was not yet in the heavens, said the tribesmen of the Chibchas. There are currently three theories on the origin of the moon. And we can go into that in a second after I adjust the image. Here. Sorry about that. I was deep in text and did not see the washed out texture. What's up there, Rockstar? Good to see you. I miss anybody joining? Let's see. What's up, C. Smith? Saw you. Right on. All right, so what do you think of this article so far? I mean, this is like an aggregation of quotes and, thoughts from different authors over the years gathered into one blog article, one archive page. But I'm gonna go into these three origins of the moon. Yo, what's up there, Tana? How's it going? Oh wait, it was Tana, right? Like Hannah. Hope I remember that correctly. So I'm going to keep going with this article. There are currently 3 theories on the origin of the moon, but be mindful that this page was updated, let me see when. It doesn't put a date here, but it looks pretty old, so if you think of any other theories that you've seen, this doesn't have to necessarily encompass all of them. Alright, so number 1, the moon originated at the same time as Earth, being formed substantially from the same material, aggregating and solidifying. Theory number 2 says the moon was formed not in the vicinity of the Earth, but in a different part of our solar system, and was later captured by Earth, which is sort of akin to what they're talking about in the electric universe. The moon was and this is number 3, the moon was originally a portion of terrestrial crust and was torn out, leaving behind the bed of the Pacific. So that's, that I think aligns with the kind of, Earth was already here and forming, and then a giant asteroid, meteor smashed into Earth, breaking off a piece of it, forming the Pacific Basin, and, you know, the ejecta essentially formed an accretion disk around Earth, and that formed ultimately into the moon over a long period of time. So if you look up NASA Goddard lunar formation and you see the CGI recreation of this theory, that's the one that's essentially currently, I think, the most agreed upon, or the one that doesn't seem to want to change. But what's happening in terms of, as far as I can gather from this idea of the electric universe and magnetism controlling planetary interaction versus gravity, then planetary capture is much more likely than planets forming via accretion disks. An accretion disk, spelled ACCRETION, is essentially like when debris or ejecta is blasted out of a planet or planetary body, and then it forms almost a ring, and then those pieces get smashed together and they ultimately form a spherical object that becomes another planetoid or a moon. So that being the case, if you actually do simulation on mathematical simulations on accretion disks, you'll see that these actually don't end up forming, because when they smash into each other at what seems like the rate that they need to smash into each other in order to form into spheres or into planetary bodies, it'd have to be going at a rate that's so much slower than what they're actually going at, which is extremely, extremely fast in space with less density than we have here on Earth. So I don't know exactly what these things are, but it would seem that we don't tend to find a lot of accretion disk examples in current day astronomy and data capture. But the theory is still there that that's how planets are formed. However, the idea of capturing the moon, and the moon being from somewhere else in the solar system, or somewhere else entirely, or maybe even the Earth just coming within the vicinity of the moon, and the moon being so large that it also attracted the Earth to some degree. The other thing to think about is this idea that the moon itself, also how the moon was formed and how these basins that we're looking at right here, so top of the screen, you know, Sea of Serenity, Sea of Tranquility, and then Oceanus Procellarum with Mare Imbrium and Mare Nectaris, the whole deeper, darker regions of the moon, that was said to have been essentially blasted out by giant impacts. But for me, and similarly here on Earth, these impacts, you know, would just devastate the entire structure of the planet, it would seem. But somehow Earth still exists and the moon still exists, and, you know, this whole area, which is now covered up by clouds. But well, I think I can adjust that from here. There we go. So to jump directly to hypothesizing with plasma, and so if you had very, very giant Birkeland currents zapping the moon, or even the moon it was all the highlands, and there was no basin at all, And then when Earth came by, for example, Earth and the moon locked magnetic fields and started to exchange Birkeland currents. And the reason the areas on the moon match up in a way with the way the continents look on Earth at certain points, potentially Africa or the Pacific or the Atlantic, similar basins exist on Earth essentially. You wonder if the dynamic points, the magnetic points on Earth, or the certain charges on Earth within its own field interacted with the moon at certain levels and created this almost mirror image of Earth and the moon based on its electrical dynamics. Mind you, this is at a point when Earth maybe wasn't rotating as fast, or it wasn't rotating at all, or the moon was rotating faster. Who knows if there was some kind of thing, depending on whether you believe the idea that we had, about 10,000 years ago, there was this axis, this polar axis where you had Venus and Mars and Saturn, and I would think Jupiter was still there, but really you saw Saturn really huge in our sky. And I guess the polar column would possibly make it seem like we went around a particular pole in the sky axis, in the sky axis, versus the night sky kind of going by. But I don't know, I'm getting off into a random tangent here about how I visualize it. However, the other thing is, where's all the debris and ejecta that was blasted out of the moon to create all the Mare, or Maria? I'm gonna get into some further text in this page. What's up, Anthony? What's up, Frank? You know how? The moon looks like it could be a burnt out sun from the past. It could be, I don't know, but I feel like the stuff that I've learned recently about the sun is that the sun is actually, what is it? It's structured liquid metallic hydrogen, essentially, is what Pierre-Marie Robitaille hypothesizes, that the sun actually has an actual surface made of liquid metallic hydrogen. And we can see that by the arcing filaments that we see on the sun using these special telescopes. They actually splash back onto the surface of the sun. And you can kind of see these transverse waves that occur on the surface of the sun, or in the surface of the sun. Therefore, I don't know, I think the structure of the sun is actually this kind of a different type of matter, or a different type of matter density. And the moon seems a little bit more like rocks and ice and different states of matter, maybe iron-based and ice-based, or titanium. And just thinking about potentially the hot white points on the moon being snow or ice shining. Let me see. Carolina says, what if Earth rotated as fast as Jupiter? We would have some really short days. That's true. Okay, yeah, exactly. I'm trying to visualize that. Q question stuff says, the planet's frequency is being messed with. Can you feel the tension, everyone's anticipation that something is happening? This planet is in chaos. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So that's a complicated question, but the simplest answer is that yes, things, piano plays by itself. Yes, things are probably happening on planet Earth right now. For example, the exponential movement of the pole, for example, moving at a forever increasing clip further north. I guess that's almost an oxymoron. So just essentially the North Pole keeps moving, and there were there were scientists that tracked this movement. And so if you ever want to look into something that's actually happening and manifesting right now, is that if the magnetic field on Earth is constantly moving, and consciousness is directly and intrinsically tied to electricity and magnetism, then consciousness is actively being affected by the position of Earth in space, or the movement of the magnetic field, or the charge of the atmosphere. If you recontextualize your entire understanding of your reality in the sense that we are nodes on a lymph system inside consciousness itself. So all of consciousness exists, and we somehow look at it from the inside out, even though we might actually be outside. And if it's good or bad, and I think the simple and probably what sounds cliched answer is, I think it's necessary to have both. And the better you want things, probably the worse things have to be simultaneously. It's almost like the breathing and the ebb and flow of nature. And if you take it into a geometric and physics world, then you can just imagine the donut shape, which is essentially torus, and the energy flow through the torus and around the torus creates a hypertrochoid, which is an hourglass shape. And so as the energy moves through these two fundamental patterns of electrical nature, then you get this ebb and flow of, I guess, interacting magnetism, interacting light flow, density flow. This is where it becomes speculative, because if you think we live in a dense reality in the ether, then we tend to be vibrations inside this ether that manifest as physical objects. That's sort of my thoughts on that. But is it good or bad? It's both good and bad. And that's maybe overall good, because we can still exist to see that or to experience that. So it leans towards being good. In the words of, or in the interpretation of Alan Watts's text from Alan Watts interpreting Hindu text discusses it in the context of the world is essentially on the verge of destruction at every moment, and it somehow pulls itself back. And that kind of riding that wave is what creates what we perceive as reality. Oh, we got Wolfman Jack, I see. What's up, my brother? Good to see you. Man, getting deep on this science stuff makes my brain all mushy. Try and talk normally after that and just get all fried. How you doing, my man? Good to see you. Quentis, what's happening? God, I keep having my feelings hurt. Did I say something? I see a bad moon rising. See Smith, good plan. Good for the, yeah. Heard this come up. Who was telling me that the North Pole is moving? I just saw a few different videos on that, and also older writings about the measurement of where the North Pole was, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Just thinking about global warming and how that's talked about, and how there's no specificity or granularity on how things are measured. It's just always so vague. I'm just putting some tunes here. The moon's looking really nice tonight. I'm staring over here at all the text, so I haven't been able to really look over there, but it's looking nice and clear. Have I missed anyone else? All right, let's see. Question Stuff says, I've gone a step further. I'm getting the impression that reality we're in is constructed. You're right on the torus and it's flat. That's why people are questioning Earth as we've been told it is. Well, for me, that kind of rationale of just saying it is something or it isn't is something that I try not to do. I'm not sure if something is or isn't flat at this point. But I do see nature throwing fractals at us, and we see toruses, and not to gaslight anybody, but you don't really see anything flat in nature, in fact. Even when things are completely compressed, they're pretty elliptical. Or they're very, very stretched circle, but at the very corners, things actually curve around, even if the curve is not visible. So, sorry if not to piss anyone off. But anyway, I think the torus is something we see. We see spheres, we see cubes, we see hexagons. All these things are noticeable in nature and in fractals. So I'm kind of just, I go off of that sort of stuff. Frank, you know what's going on, says, what are your thoughts of the moon being a hologram or an image created by some sort of projection? My thoughts on that are really simple. When that comes up, it's just as magical as the moon being what it is, you know? So if somebody some person or some alien or some artificial intelligence has the power to project an image so perfectly of the moon, then that level technology is already something to be in awe and to strive to get released. You know, it's not something to be fearful of. It's actually astounding if that's possible. It doesn't seem correct because the moon actually interacts with Earth magnetically, and it's visible through the clouds and life cycle and the tides. So the moon is an actual object. It's much more likely that it's a spherical magnetic node in a system interacting with Earth, which is also another node on a network, and they exchange information. Like, that's much more reasonable to me. Holograms look terrible and don't really work, which is why everybody is still watching this on a flat screen. You know, there's something about it. It's just like Hollywood tropes and media create this idea of an elite group of people that control high-level technology, that they're just trying to fuck with you. Excuse my language, but I think it's more important than that, because if we ever want to get that technology out, then you have to really understand what the technology is. And I don't think speculating as to whether holograms or teleportation is a real thing or not a real thing. I think at the fundamental level is to look at the moon close up and to see these patterns that definitely don't look like impact craters. And when they don't look like impact craters, then they look like this idea of electrical scarification, which can be reproduced in a laboratory. That opens up the whole world for you. For me, it allowed me to just think about how does the moon interact with other bodies, and how does the Earth have all these formations on it from electrical scarring. And from there's so much we can think about and talk about that I don't think whether the moon is a hologram or if the Earth is flat really matters in the context of legitimate lunar geology, which is accessible to regular people like you and I. You and all of y'all. Just find a song here. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? What's up, 24/7? How you doing? What's up, Tim Martin? Good to see you. That's another thing Tammy said, makes a great point that I brought up as well and I've thought about, which is that our eyes are spherical and the lenses in our eyes distort everything. There's almost no way to actually check whether what you're looking at is in fact flat at all. Even if it was like a holographic projection, you would still have an X plane, a Y plane, and a Z plane of information, all three of which would create a third dimensional, non-flat reality. So even if you were to think about it in the context of simulation theory or Truman Show, it's much more likely that things are spherical in nature just because that's how magnetism flows. It was the simple thing that got me out of a few years ago out of talking about the shape of the Earth. It almost doesn't matter at this point. So you have how the craters were formed. That's a large gateway into proper questioning. And then you have the age of the moon and the age of the universe and the age of the Earth being measured by certain factors that are all debatable. Things like the speed of light, redshift, carbon dating, potassium dating, tree ring dating, stability on Earth, and the Big Bang, and it calls into question a lot of different things. And you guys have any questions for me specifically, I can talk about them. Here, let me take this in order. So Rainsong says, does anyone have information on Saturn's ring makers? I've heard this brought up many times, but never looked into it. Is this the ufology side of it, where aliens, like giant progenitor aliens, live in the rings of Saturn in their giant halls? Because that's one of the sides of them, one of those stories that I read at one point. But really, so far, the one that I've heard, the story about Saturn that makes the most sense so far is that Saturn was almost a brown dwarf and didn't have rings, had a much larger outer shell, and that it exploded. And that's essentially where we got the water on Earth from, because we were within the red sheath of this giant gas, brown dwarf, Saturn. And either our sun or the comet Venus, maybe the expulsion of Venus from Jupiter, or another type of comet, or maybe we just went into a different part of the solar system along with the planet Saturn, and it got, what happens is, I think it's called a Z-pinch, or no, there's this massive electrical discharge when a system is trying to balance itself out. So maybe when the sun came into the magnetic or electrical region of Saturn at the time, it I don't know, it maybe excited it to a point where you had a huge discharge and Saturn exploded. Let's see, we got a fat potato. Yeah, so UFO phenomenon is like an entire topic that is also debatable. You start realizing that that the powers that be really want us to believe in aliens, and the narrative wants us to believe in aliens. So I've started to realize that if you want to discover anything that seems truthful, do the opposite of what the powers that be want you to believe. So the whole ufology movement got co-opted a few years back. I mean, I'm sure much earlier than that, maybe 20 years ago, but recently, about 5 years ago, the kind of decline, the whole idea of the Gaia TV thing, and David Wilcock, and Graham Hancock, and the Mars face, and the erasing of the photos, it seems so much more likely that these guys were put in place to throw us off the trail, so to speak. Interesting, electric universe, you say. I have some links in the description of the video that actually that are visual representations of what I talk about all the time. It's something that I don't really want to be necessarily preaching, but I think it's a great filter by which to observe the universe. Just simultaneously, you can believe in public science, you could even be a flat earther, you could be a concave earther, and banana-shaped earth, whatever you want, but at the same time, you could also entertain the fact that the universe is fundamentally electric in nature and everything is interconnected, and the implications of what that might mean. Yo, what's up, Sensei Camilo? How's it going? Man, I've been talking for a while. It's like going on an hour right here. I'm gonna need a drink soon. I was reading some of those texts. I think I'll get back to that in a second. But I kind of stopped right at the point where we were talking about the formation of the moon. Mary says, there appears to be a rectangular linear shape on the center left. and the center left. Yeah, I totally see that. I see different sets of that. I'm going to take off the recording so we can see the moon a little bit wider. Maybe that's not much better. But essentially the arcs or the rays coming off of Tycho crater and then towards Mare Imbrium. So essentially make a diamond square in the center of the circle. You can kind of see these rays meeting each other, turning into hexagons and squares in different formations, but the bottom right corner would be the two rays coming off of Tycho crater, so that would be the bottom right corner. And then Copernicus would be the bottom left corner, or even Kepler. Then you have two lines going straight up. Yo, Mark Rowe, what's going on? Sensei says, just got back from exploring Lavania's caverns. Yeah, did you catch what I was doing earlier? I found this book that was written about, it was this guy essentially breaking down what he thought of Somnium, and it really sounded like thoughts out of my own head. Yeah, you see that, Mary? Yeah, no, there's a bit of a delay on the stream because of the 4K, so I'm gonna hit record again and go back to the wide shot, but you can definitely see that square shape. I mean, honestly, the full moon is great because you can see all these features at once, but it doesn't give you the relief, which is the kind of shading that you see when on the way. Essentially, really, I like the waning crescent the most because you get to see this incredible three-dimensional projection of Aristarchus on the back plate. We're gonna try and really stream this one next week, probably the 23% wane. What's up, Gloom Tube? What's the deal? Has there always been a supermoon classification? Seems like I don't remember them happening. Yeah, that's some stuff that just, I guess, materialized with the rise of the internet, but essentially just means that the moon is at perigee, which is closest orbit to Earth, or closest on its orbit to Earth. So it's 15% brighter and slightly larger visually in the sky to us. So I guess people can call it supermoon. I guess I called it supermoon. I don't know why. But really, sometimes titles are just weird. I'm like, what do I call this? Live, 4K, who knows? Or sometimes I just want to write a pun. So I happen to call it supermoon. But it's nothing, I don't know. You can take it as official. What's up, dupes? Good to see you, Duplicate. Any sightings of new crater from meteor impact a few weeks ago? No, I thought about that, and I saw the video of that happening, and it's twofold. One is it's amazing that you can see that. Like, how big was it so that we saw the flash? I mean, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers across, that's huge. Like, it would leave a massive impact. Especially, like, I mean, where is it coming from? How fast was it about to, did it impact the lunar surface? And why are there no follow-up articles on it? So that's where I think about, like, how it happened or what happened with that. And then the second part of it is likely can't see the impact with this scope because, I mean, what would it be about? Can't imagine what 1 kilometer impact would look like, in fact. So if you look up videos of lunar impacts, there's so few to really reference and learn from that I don't have that very much actual information about it. That's my thoughts. It would be nice to have a follow-up article from the guy who did it and analysis of, like, the size of it, the speed of it, and the trajectory, where it was coming from, and whether you can actually see it with LRO, for Sensei says, I heard Sirius was going to get occulted tonight by an asteroid. Have you heard of this? It was, I think, at 9 o'clock yesterday, I believe. Maybe it's tonight, but I think it was 2:18 on the article that I read. But that would be like, I mean, an instant, probably imperceptible. I mean, maybe somebody captured that, but I didn't see any videos when I looked. Got some clouds rolling through, but looks pretty cool. All right, what do we got? Robert Booker, The Body Electric. Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the actual book, but I've definitely seen that one. Gonna bookmark it. I'll save that for later. Vision says, the one on November 14th, 2016 was the closest full supermoon since January 26, 1948, and will not be surpassed until November 25th, 2034. Rainsong says, I'm open to all ideas and opinions, but what really makes me laugh is when people say satellites are orbiting the Earth by balloons. Yet Chris has filmed many satellites that clearly had no balloon. Well, yeah. I mean, that doesn't, I mean, I laugh too sometimes, but also I think, you know, the idea of these spherical, metallic, I mean, you could call them balloons, but maybe there are these metallic spheres that are perfect shape for floating in the null zone, like gravitationally. Or maybe they're little like UFO flattened disks. That's why we have the UFO phenomenon. I mean, I personally, and no one has to really buy this, but I'm almost certain testing of these magnetic flying saucers using Tesla technology has been happening for what, 100 years? It wouldn't shock me if the UFO phenomenon was something that was just regular testing of these magnetic shapes, like simple spheres and toruses and flattened disks and rings and cubes even, and rocket-shaped devices, all that are hollowed out and as lightweight as possible using magnetic frequency and excitation to actually float through the atmosphere. And so that's just what I thought. That's what I think. And so if that has been being studied for 100 years maybe or more, then the technology easily exists for that to be perceived or to look like balloons, but who knows? You know, because I've seen a lot of footage of really weird stuff. I mean, and in fact, there are a lot of videos that I have where I even use the word UFO just in, I don't even know why I would use the word UFO, but just in the literal sense, like we don't know what these are. Some of them are trackable via Stellarium, some are not. Some were things that just looked like, you know, like a bunch of balloons, but really we're traveling with a trajectory. You got the lunar wave stuff. You got the ones that curve around the side of the moon, and you're like, how are you seeing these things? So for me, it's a lot about like, how are we actually seeing these things? What is vision? You know, what are optics? Like, how do optics work? What is focus? What is vanishing point? Why is vanishing point? Why are the eyes concave or lenses convex? And what does that mean in terms of consciousness? And then when you get there, I think it becomes so convoluted that it's really hard to want to pursue things like, you know, conspiracy, like ufology stuff anymore, because really optics and the existence of the moon, these very fundamental, very basic things, are just so much more prevalent and real than the speculative nature of aliens or any of these conspiracies that really diverge from really simple things like existence of the sun and the moon. The fact that we can see it every day and acts like a calendar, and it essentially runs life and death. And these are and it inspires art and myth. And yet we have religions that where people are loyal to fabricated human figures that look like old men with beards, versus looking up in the sky and realizing like you have an existing living if you woke up one day and you had no idea that the moon existed, and you saw it for the first time, you wouldn't be remiss in thinking it was a spacecraft or something approaching Earth, or really something so powerful that you'd spend all your time thinking about what it was. And somewhere we lost that as a humankind, as a species that exists on Earth. That we've lost this idea that we live in space, and we lost this idea that the moon and the sun are as important as they actually really are physically. That's ridiculous to me, you know. I don't know how that happened, but that's my goal here, in a way. If anyone asks me, I kind of just say, hey, I'm here to show you that what saved me from these insane rabbit holes was just realizing how simple it actually really was just looking up at the moon and then talking about the moon was enough. And then when you do that a little bit, then you end up talking about a lot of other things. So I just want to make clear to everybody about the electric universe. I don't think that Thunderbolt's project is like 100% truthful about everything or right about everything. That's a big caveat. Like, I say electric universe a lot, and I believe in a lot of parts of it, but I don't think they're 100% completely done with everything. It's not settled. And that's what's also nice about them too, is that while Thornhill says that it's not settled, and they imply that this whole scientific venture of electric universe is to keep working on it and to start working on it in earnest in the citizen community. Because, I mean, that's really, if we want to change anything or get anything released or updated, we're going to have to ask for things specifically. Oh, the Black Knight picture. So there's one picture of this satellite called the Black Knight satellite. And of course, when you first get into conspiracies and ufology, you see this picture of the Black Knight satellite. But really, when you analyze it when you see all the different analyses of it, there's one that struck me as the most logical. And once you look at it that way, you'll see that it's a much smaller piece of debris falling off a particular craft that was going into the atmosphere about 200 miles up in the sky. So one of these satellites that we have or that we launch into space goes up to a certain altitude, and then it jettisons its, I don't know if it's a booster rocket necessarily. I think this particular piece of debris was like a backpack of some sort, or like a storage unit pack of some sort. And if you look at it that way and you really check out that picture, you'll see that it's much smaller than it seems. It's not like this giant, like, rogue Star Wars style ship floating above the Earth's atmosphere. It's actually the camera trick. That's what I think, but I could be totally wrong. Oh, cool, GloomTube, welcome. Yeah, sometimes I'll get into these topics. I try to not evangelize any particular message, really. The idea here is for us to just hang out together and appreciate the moon and talk about space and, just topics that are cool, no ostracizing people for their views, changing the dynamic and the mood of science from this bullying and belittling of people. And there's this whole idea that science actually shares information, but they really don't, or that science is out there for the people, but public science right now is entertainment science, I think. So these shows that we do where we have backyard astronomers, even people who completely disagree with me, for example, on Electric Universe, and they still believe in the public narrative, even if they're showing the moon. I'm not talking about anyone really in particular. I just mean, like, let me lower this a second. I just mean, like, I talk about Electric Universe pretty often, I think, and the reason I do is because I've finally related a conspiracy, or what people call a conspiracy, I call actually the future of physics, but But honestly, people consider like Electric Universe pseudoscience, or they make fun of it. They call it another conspiracy or psyop, and true, could be. But if it's not, then it's this huge gateway into the future of science. And you finally, when you can look at the moon up close, and then you look at electric discharge in a laboratory, and then you've seen the tendrils and the devices of electricity manifest directly on the moon, you know, you don't need other people to tell you what to look into after that. Then you can really take the axiom for yourself and dive as deep as you want to go. And that's just one aspect of it. For me, another one, while I'm at it, is when I looked at our, you know, like I was like, oh man, who from the past century was a real astronomer, like who did astronomy, like we're doing now, like looking through a scope, logging the data, discussing the data. Granted, I'm not doing the math, you know, but we're looking at the data, actual physical data of the moon right now, and then analyzing it in whatever capacity, you know, from a PhD standpoint to a kindergarten level standpoint, and everywhere in between right now. Everybody's got their own perspective on the moon, but we're actually analyzing the physical data, and it's not on a simulated screen. So that being said, when I looked into Halton ARP, HALTONARP, this guy is, you know, the trite way of looking at it, and I don't really like that they call him the modern day Galileo, but that's what they call him in the Thunderbolts project. But Halton ARP actually had telescope time with the large scopes, and he did research into this concept of redshift, which is how distance is measured in space. And if you want to look into something like that, it is really complicated, but it's very rewarding because it explains, it gets you into this whole concept of where things are in space, how things are moving away from us or not moving away from us, the origins of the Big Bang, the oranges of the universe. That's a culinary book to write. Let's see, so Since Camilla says, what about Tesla saying that it existed before the advent of satellites? Also, it was said to go into trajectory that the first satellites were unable to achieve until many years later. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know about that. But I can imagine that if you use rocket boosters to get to a certain altitude, and if you have enough thrust, you should be able to get through this membrane, this magnetic membrane. And if you can get to this place called the null zone, which is between the two magnetic membranes, is it possible to use tiny little thruster engines with very, very low fuel, or ionic thrusters to push the craft and to gain speed as we know it? So it's in the public science sector, it's just discussed in a certain way, but in fact all the spacecraft that go into space right now use this method, and we don't talk about it that way. That's a possibility. Yeah, chip ARP, exactly. Duplicate makes a comment, says, a growing problem with the citizen EU community is the obsession over Birkeland currents. People claim to see them everywhere and in everything just because they want to be part of the group. Well, I'm not sure how to exactly respond to that, but for me, I know I say Birkeland current a lot, and the reason I say it is because I think you have to give credit where credit is due, and Christian Birkeland postulated that these lightning bolts just exist at every level. Really tiny lightning bolts are like static electricity, and then larger lightning bolts happen, you know, maybe at the tips of larger lightning bolts that we see in the sky, or thunderbolts. And then above that, you have this kind of plasma layer where you have the sprite layer. There are pictures of these incredible red lightning, curved lightning, ball lightning. And that's the stuff we see physically. So to think that that stuff is what carves Earth and runs life and consciousness and controls gravity and controls planetary attraction is a much more logical reach than this idea of gravity and relativism and Newtonian theory that's pretty old at this point, that needs to be revised. And so just this larger unifying principle of underlying electrical mechanics is much, for me, a much better reach, I think. Takes me to a place where I start questioning things. So you couple that with what Halton Arp was saying, which is, in a nutshell, he did this research on like, I want to say like 10,000, but maybe that's a large number, but he did a lot of research on galaxy formation inside quasars. And he showed, after a lot of research, that galaxies essentially let me try and explain this a little better. So there's this idea that there's redshift and blue shift, and it's a measure of the recession of the universe after the Big Bang. So things are either moving away from us or coming closer to us. And there are very few things that blue shift come close to us, and there are many greater things like a much greater number of things that redshift. And what they mean by redshift specifically is that with, I want to say, spectrographs or radio telescopes, they do spectrum analysis of the radiation coming from space, and they put it next to a chart, and they read off the shift of these, what are the lines? There's certain, Fraunhofer lines. Fraunhofer lines are this little section where I want to say the light gets cut off as it comes in, and it shifts the light on the spectrum to a certain degree, and because it shifts in one direction or another, there's redshift or blue shift. I know that's a really very, very infantile way of explaining that. Sorry, scientists, but that's sort of what I understand it to be. And now and our contemporary science uses measurements like that nowadays, obviously, way more advanced, where based on a chart system, they measure how far away things are, and therefore, by having redshift and the speed of light be determinants of distance and age, they say, we have contemporary science saying things like, this is 20 trillion miles away, which means you're looking into the past. And so it pushes forth this idea that we're distant, and that we're doing this incredible thing, which is, looking at things that are already dead. And it imposes a kind of really fabricated reality, when in fact, what's actually happening is our eyes are directly connecting to the galaxies right now. And our instruments are directly connected to the moon and the sun and the stars, etc. That's what's physically happening as we perceive it within consciousness. But science has taken us to this place where things are an imaginary mythos supported by a structure of math, which is a great language to describe things, but it's not actual reality. It exists within our consciousness. And it's become almost like its own god. So you can use math to really create any type of reality that you say it is, and if it's supported by math, and you don't know math, it's almost impossible to argue with people. Yeah, Fraunhofer, I think that's how you say it. So you got redshift being questioned, based on, so Halton Arp essentially questions redshift and says, okay, redshift may be, in fact, a measure of youth and not distance, because he took pictures of galaxies being birthed along larger galaxies' spiral arms, and determined that measurements that we had for certain types of galaxies had redshift, different levels of redshift, and they were interconnected, and they shouldn't have had that same redshift. Or blue shift for that matter. And so instead of it being a measure of distance, it's actually a measure of the youthfulness or the age of a galaxy. And then if you have the speed of light, I'm going to jump way forward, which is that if you follow Theoria Apophysis, the angry photographer, and he talks about how light essentially just is a perturbation in the dielectric field, and it's based on density, and it's based on, really there's no such thing as a particle-wave duality, and there's no such thing as really the speed of light. Light doesn't actually travel. And so those two topics, speed of light, and if it's a variable, if it's a constant, what is it, why is it, and is it something at all? And redshift and that rabbit hole, those two together coupled with visibly seeing electric craters on the moon or electric scarification in any capacity on the moon, even if it's one feature. And I would say like one of the biggest ones would be Copernicus crater, or Tycho, being a very, very easily visual reference for electric scarification. All right, that's where I got to. So everything else really fell by the wayside in terms of, you know, being more important, like figuring out the shape of the Earth, or figuring out what gematria, or figuring out, etc. Any number of things. Those three things are so huge that it could overturn the entire fundamental world of physics for all of us. Oh, Vision, thanks. Says Fraunhofer lines in astronomical spectroscopy. Thank you. Spectrographs, spectroscope. Any of the dark absorption lines in the spectrum of the sun or any other star caused by selective absorption. Right, so essentially you'd see these black lines in the spectrum that they got from pointing the, I want to say it's a radio telescope that gets these. So the movement of these black lines across the spectrum denotes redshift or blue shift. And so Halton Arp has only a few videos on YouTube where he talks about how he did all these measurements, and it's very, very plausible that redshift is not a determinant of the universe expanding, which, you know, is a great and huge, huge field to start thinking about. Also, my camera started to overheat, y'all, so I'm just leaving it for a second. Hopefully it won't break stream. Let's see what's going on in the chat. It says, what's my take on Elon Musk has been talking about? I haven't followed him in a while, but I guess now with the whole Chinese rover thing, he wants to go to the moon. I'm curious, man. Like, I want to see it happen. I don't want retribution, really. I just want to see the space race happen. Space tourism, it would open industry, it would give us resolve, it would unify the world, we'd figure it out, you know, we'd learn more about the moon. I think this whole idea that the moon is uninteresting is just a massive, like, divisive tool that somehow got interpolated into our reality, but it's just such a silly notion that the moon is unimportant. It's clearly super duper important. Even in the public sector, even without any of the conspiracy stuff, the moon is very important. And why'd they spend $30 billion in the 70s trying to go there, you know? Yo, what's up, Mr. Lonely? Mary says, what is gematria? So gematria is a whole other topic about how language is coded and how languages are related by numbers and by shapes, and how we use language to kind of cast spells on one another, and and the other side of it, the kind of darker side, is that all events on Earth and in your daily life can be represented by numbers and linked by numbers and events. A lot of people think it's really hokey, but there are people who do it really well, and, you know, it can take you into very, very dark places. But there's a lot of it on YouTube, and I would take some of it with a grain of salt and some of it as serious as you'd like, because it does match up. There are a lot of things where you're like, wow, how did that person die on that day? And how did they release this story when they didn't even know about this thing? And there's a lot of they, and there's a lot of feeling that you have no control over it. But the other side of it, the kind of nice side of it, is that if you learn it, you can use it for yourself and to understand the universe better. Because numbers really and language are fascinating, especially if you know more than one language. And you can understand there's another concept about language called phonemes, how babies have the capability of understanding all languages when they're born. And then by virtue of how they're raised, they tend to kind of eliminate the ability to understand these other phonemes and therefore learn the languages that they're taught. But arguably, we're all born with the capability of learning any language, which is incredible. Makes you question, like, what is language? And the other thing about communication is that we have this idea that we're all separate, and exchanging sound waves. But what are sound waves? And if you really take that, then you realize the body is vibrating and creating these resonances, and then magnets are picking up those resonances and transmitting them with the microphone, for example. But in reality, like when you're sitting in a room with somebody, the air around you is electrified. And so you're transmitting these sound waves or currents through the atmosphere. And whatever's happening in the earlobe, in the eardrum, is is also vibrating. I mean, what is a shell even? Like a shell is a fractal set of hexagonal crystals shaped in this spiral formation according to a certain number. If you clone an object along a phi ratio or a spiral or a pi ratio, you get all these different types of fractal geometry. So a shell, and by virtue of that, your eardrum and the way that's shaped like a wishbone and a little drum, which mimics the instruments that we use, and so on and so forth. So there's this supersymmetry understanding of shapes. Goes back to electricity, because the idea of cymatics, you can create geometry, visual geometry, using electricity and sound. So I think it's not just electricity, but electricity encompasses all these other things that are like sound waves, light, But fundamentally, how's it all moving around is really what it's all about. So do we really have this idea of this mystical, magical, dark energy and dark matter, or is it just really counter space and it's all connected, but we just don't see it that way? I think it's much nicer and more rewarding to look at it that way. Yeah, Fibonacci, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Fibonacci sequences, y'all. All right, I'm gonna take a little break. I've been talking non-stop. Dig by vibration. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yo, what up, Rethink Everything? How you doing? Magnetism, indeed. That was a sweet cloud right there. All right, Game of Life going out to Rain Song. Take a little break right here. I'll be back in a few. think I'm a little out of tune here. Yeah, so you got some clouds here, but they're moving. I'm trying to keep this in balance over here. Pretty moon. So high, go to work today and toil away. You got what you got and what I am. We could never solve the riddle. I'm flying so low, I'm feeling so high. Stay in bed today, heaven awaits. Never solve the riddle. So who is the real one? Who has the will now? I was the hunter. We gather the stone to do all the voodoo you do. All that you got, not enough. We can never find the middle. So who is the real one? Telephone, and I've been gone since I've been alone. If I get too high, you know they won't leave me alive. And I was tripping strong on your faded phone. You call me up every day and tell me your mind's got a price to pay. I don't want no grief to keep me away. I can't find my way, don't mess me up. Let me find my grave and I'll be your hero. It's perfectly, I'll be your hero. Your hero. Don't rub my face in the dirt. call me trippy. It's just gotten cloudy. It was really nice earlier, but got to sit through it, and hopefully it'll pass. I feel like it gets to a certain point. You got that cloud layer typically comes in. Still got good visuals for probably another hour, I would say. Hey, peace out, Mark Rowe. Have a good one, my man. It's nice seeing you. Catch you on the next one. Turn off this distortion a little bit. Go soft, softer. A little echo. Yeah, that's nice. Pretty sweet. Something a little off on the tuning. Wait a second, y'all. Maybe it's right. Face the stormy weather, yeah, all I know is you better look out for me. When you float, you're falling like a feather, yeah. Everyone who knows, who knows, who loves, who loves, who loves you best will float. Loves you best will float. Formidable opponent, angry lecture. Formidable opponent, crackpot. Formidable opponent, you can walk out. Formidable opponent, you have the choice. Formidable opponent, angry lecture. Formidable opponent, you can walk out. Formidable opponent, angry crackpot. Formidable opponent, think you have the choice. Think you have the choice. Just float, face the stormy weather, yeah. All we know, we know, we know, we know, we know it best. Falling up the fair, yeah. All I know, 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 wanna be. Yeah. Formidable opponent, angry lecture. Formidable opponent, just crackpot. Formidable opponent, you can walk out. Formidable opponent, think you have the choice. Formidable opponent, angry lecture. Formidable opponent, dangerous crackpot. Formidable opponent, you can walk out. Formidable opponent, think you have the choice. Think you have the choice. Think you have the choice. Just float. Stolen by the rock star. Don't know what you're killing for. Staring up at those familiar lights and others. Don't make me pay the cost. I wanna live another day, of course. just one mad dream. Say I'm trying to forgive, locking my lips to break them apart. Trying to forgive, having those trips to keep it abroad. You're stuck in the coil. I can't pay forever, leave without you. I can't pay forever, I'll leave without you. I guess I missed the plane. Dang. Thanks, Rain Song, appreciate that. I've never been. Want to see you all again. Wanna feel alive like I've never been. Set aside some time to see. I wanna feel alive. Wanna know. Wanna feel like I've never been before, like I've never been before. Damn kids. Yo, thanks Ellie, Sensei Camille, catch you in a minute. I think the clouds have dissipated. We got some very clear moonage. I didn't catch the plane, but I'll check it out after. Still got full phase going on, 99.5% illuminated right now at 31 degrees altitude. Just going through some weird sounds, making up a new one. I fear it's never like the last one you would hear from my lips. And my voice will take you on this trip, free with the wool you know, free from the bodies behold. If we dissipate today, I hope our memory remains long with you. How with you I crown you. Hope you forgive me. Trying something so unbelievable. I hope you forgive me. Trying to do things differently. You see, I had another vision some way back in my 20s. It's copper pennies floating through your eyes, and you left me sharp nose. all around. You see, I had some place to be. And no, it's not back home. Alright, that's some made up new tunes inspired by the moon. Let me see, I was going through some of these texts. Maybe I can talk and then see if I get inspired by something to write. So I got this other one, which is a little more conspiracy looking. This is by Jonathan Gray, and it's from July 2003, and it says, "Were we on the moon in 2309 BC?" So this is a quick excerpt from it. In 1926, Professor A.W. Bickerton declared the concept of shooting at the moon to be foolish and impossible. In 1935, the noted astronomer F.R. Moulton wrote that man could never travel into outer space. Dr. Richard van der Riet Woolley, former astronomer royal, called the idea of space travel utter bilge. Apparently 8 months later, Sputnik was orbiting the Earth. In a remote northern region of Tibet lie the ruins of Somnium capital, discovered by the Duparc expedition in 1725. Within the city, Duparc came upon a mass of monoliths, once coated with silver, a pyramid, part of a tower of blue porcelain, and a royal palace containing thrones with sun and moon imagery. There was also a large milky white stone surrounded by exquisite drawings. Now for the stunning sequel. In 1952, Soviet expedition arrived. It was blown by the monks, yeah, by the Tibetan monks, oh yeah, by the Tibetan monks, oh yeah. The Tibetan monks made some ancient documents whose descriptions agreed with those of Duparc. But here's the breathtaking part. The milky white stone, so said the documents, was brought here from the moon. So apparently they had moon rock. It says, is it possible? Could man actually have left this earth and gone to the moon in ages past? Was space travel a natural adjunct to his civilization? And are there any clues to that? Indeed, there are. Indications of the reality of ancient space travel do come from widely separated parts of the world. Written and oral tradition is widespread, and it seems reliable. That's what I think. Okay, next page says, all right, here we go. Chinese historians in particular never tried to please their rulers at the expense of truth. Death was preferred to untruthful reports of history. As an example, we have the fate of historians in the reign of Qi in 547 BC. We should therefore take seriously the historical reports of China, even if they seem to be at first far-fetched. There's tendency in scientific circles nowadays to regard ancient documentaries and even mythology and folklore as sources of history. Actually, I think that's really not necessarily true. I feel like we've really abandoned some of the folklore and we treat it like pseudoscience, but go on. Anthony Roberts expresses it this way: legends are like time capsules that preserve their contents through ages of ignorance. See, I like this concept, but it seems they might have been talking about July 2003, which I think is probably a similar time. Man, that was during the Bush years, bad time. All right, in regard to some of the chronicles cited hereafter, internal evidence will carry its own proofs of authenticity. I don't know, is this interesting at all? I feel like basically they're just speculating as to whether we were on the moon, thousands of years ago, based on this expedition. And then it goes on to list all these different places and stories from these places. Yeah, so Moonstone record from hundreds of years ago at least, if not thousands. let's see what they say. Okay, my first source is an old manuscript. The ancient scholar who wrote this decades before people spoke of artificial satellites and spaceships. So number one, India, vehicles that could revolve around Earth, i.e. satellites. Here's something interesting. Okay, their fuel is drawn from the air in a very simple and cheap way. The motor is something like a modern turbine. It works from one chamber to another and does not stop or stall unless switched off. If nothing happens, it continues to function. The ship in which it is built could revolve as long as it liked around Earth, only falling when the parts of which it was made up burnt up. So this is interesting because it just references the whole, oh, another plane, y'all. Just passed, that's crazy. Let's see if there are any aberrations in the moon's surface after those two planes passing by. I didn't see anything earlier, but this one might have caused some turbulence. Doesn't seem like it, though. All right, so let's see. That's a reference to essentially fueling the spacecraft or the satellite from the ether or whatever, wherever the satellite eventually gets to in terms of its orbit, in terms of what, 200 miles, let's say. There's this point where it can absorb energy from the vacuum, or what's called the vacuum, but likely that null zone where there's no pull from either magnetic field from space or from Earth, and I guess it can float and then absorb electricity or power from the region that it's situated in. All right, so 2 says India. Philosophers and scientists who orbited the Earth below the moon and above the clouds are spoken of in ancient Surya Siddhanta. 3, Chaldea. 2 modern rockets emitting rays at the rear, a box-like loudspeaker, and a copy of a Gemini capsule are engraved on a copper chisel unearthed at Ur. Number 4, Sumeria. Pictograph texts describe the 3 related objects on display in Sippar: the golden sphere, the gir, a long arrow-shaped object divided into several compartments, and the Alik Mahrati, meaning advancer that makes vessel go, literally, or i.e. a motor and engine. Together they look very much like a 3-part rocket ship. So all the stuff that's listed out right here is references to satellites, space travel in ancient texts. Let's see. Another explicit sign here is the combination of the 2 words din and gir, when gir is G-I-R, when joined together to form the word G-DS, I guess Jidis. The tail of the infinite gir or gir fits perfectly into the opening of the rocket like din, which exhausts from the fire in its tail. Because they're talking about symbols, or the way this was spelled, I guess, it says the pictograph, right? Pictographic text from Sumeria. It shows a rocket ship. All right, Peru, a clay vessel 8.5 inches high, portrays a kind of space capsule on which motor and exhaust are clearly recognizable. In Italy, a painting discovered in the niche of a room under Rome's Palatine Hill in 1961 portrays what appears to be a rocket. It stands on a launching pad. From it runs guys or cables. Behind it is a tall wall resembling the counterblast wall. All right, let me know if you think this is interesting at all. And I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Inside, we is God, you know. Deep inside, God go away, come. Slow it down, son. Feel the raven falling from. Slow it Vision figured out the last plane transit that just happened was a JetBlue tail number B6 2326 TPA to JFK. Very cool. All right, maybe I'll put on a backing track right here and jam out. Let's see what I have. Seductive backing track, okay. Whoops. not feeling this jam so much, you know. I'm a bit meandering there. I'm gonna take a little break right here because I just got all hot, and it's one of those zones, you know, where you get too deep. I think it's just sitting in front of like 2 giant computer monitors. You get cooking over here. The moon is looking nice and clear. I feel like it's starting to get dim up at the top near the windowsill. Tammy, take it easy. Nice to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by. Let's get some tunes going here. Something different. Yo, what's up, Akumas? How's it going? Watching it from 3:30 a.m. That's cool, man. Where are you watching it from? I guess it's somewhere in Europe or the Middle East. All right, gonna get a quick drink over here. When it's so dry, so dry. Yeah. So 24/7, you talk about the snow on the moon, or are you talking about snow in the States? Anyway, I got rid of the stacker, and we're zoomed in right here to Proclus, right underneath Mare Crisium. And just settling in on it, we'll get a little bit better focus, but it's going in and out. What up, lemons and potatoes? Cool name. In my place, there's no moon. We're in the right place. See some moon right here. So this area is, like I said, south of Mare Crisium, and this crater in the middle called Proclus, Proclus, about 28 kilometers in diameter, about 2,400 feet tall on the insides. So it kind of gives you a sense of what we can really see in terms of, tiny things hitting the surface. Let's move around a little bit and check out this region, Mare Undarum. So there's Mare Marginis and Mare Undarum right here to the right of Mare Crisium. Better context if I just zoom out a little bit. So right now I got the red box around Mare Crisium. And that little crater we were looking at, Proclus, is right there in the center of that. So let's zoom into Crisium and then move over to the right, kind of see these features which are about to go under in terms of where the terminator is about to extend. This is one of my other, besides the other side where you have Aristarchus, I really like this region. So we're seeing like 3 or 4 different craters, all very stretched out because they're on the extreme side. Oh, now we got clouds. Dang. I was gonna name some of these. Rainsong says, I have an 8-inch beginner scope. Are there any lenses you recommend I invest in to get sharp, clear images, or do you recommend I save up and invest on a better scope? So, what type of 8-inch is it? Is it a Celestron or like an Ioptron? Well, it depends. I mean, because if you have one of the Celestron 8 inches, I would say stick with that. But there's some, the other ones, it's really not really about the glass necessarily. It's about the setup and the mount, typically. So the Nexstar Celestron 8 inch and the 6 inch come with this single arm mount, which while wobbly is very easy to set up. And then the CPC 11 inch that I'm using right now, that we're looking at the moon through, is a fork mount, so it's got 2 sides, and it's a lot more steady than the 8-inch. The lenses I recommend, oh, so you do have the Celestron 8-inch. Yeah, the lenses I recommend, Televue makes a really great 17mm lens. There's a Nagler, N-A-G-L-E-R lens. I mean, they're kind of expensive, but if you're doing optical viewing, it's worth investing in a really nice, like 17mm or 17.3mm, I think is the one I'm thinking of. And who else makes another good one? Meade, actually. Meade's telescopes lately are not the greatest, I guess. But they still make pretty good, pretty affordable. Like a 14mm Meade lens would run you about $100. Same thing, the Televue is about $150 to $200. Oh yeah, let's get into Aristarchus over here. What's up, Patient Mental? There have not been any waves, but there are 2 airplanes that passed by in the stream earlier. I'll probably timestamp them after. And there are some, like, what else would I think? I'm definitely thinking you should have a focal reducer, an F6.3 focal reducer, and I'm not sure, like, a good diagonal is probably a good investment as well. What's up, George Kalasowski? Some clouds there, or what was that jet contrail earlier? Yeah, there were a couple of airplanes that passed by, and but there are also clouds moving through. Not a lot of aberrant trails today. Oh yeah, we're going to Aristarchus. Yeah, so it's getting dim up at the top because of the windowsill. Got like 20 more minutes probably. Aristarchus still kind of pretty bright. Is that like a little flicker? No, that's just the atmosphere. Just atmospherics. All right, there, kind of, yeah, if we hang on it, I think it's just, there's some turbulence probably coming from different storms up north. Yeah, here we go with some clouds again. Let's just hang out here for a second, it'll get clear. Probably reduce the ISO. Give it a second. I'm gonna try and stream in a couple of nights when we have better visibility of Herodotus and Schroeder's Valley. But maybe we can see what I was talking about with this secondary. No, it's hard to see right now. George Kalasowski says, wow, I give medals to the few folk who actually said my name right. That's funny. What we got over here? So Rain says, so you think I'll be fine with the 8-inch as long as I invest on some lenses I just named? Is it possible to see DSO with the 8-inch? Yeah, so the 8-inch is really great, actually the sweet spot for dark sky viewing and also lunar and planetary. So typically you want to, the guys who do dark sky imaging, deep sky imaging, if you look at the Astro Imaging channel, does the best version, that like has the most like creme de la creme of astro imagers on his stream, Adam, and there's another guy on there who's like really an expert, and these guys talk about really what the setups are like, how expensive it is. But point is, after listening to their podcast a whole bunch, I realized that having an 8-inch Celestron or like an Edge HD at 8 inches is probably the coolest, like best middle ground to explore, right? So you can do moon stuff really well. You can also gather enough light to do deep sky imaging. For sure, I would say if you want to do like, if you want to start DSO stuff, I would get a focal reducer first, the F6.3 Celestron focal reducer, because that actually allows the 8-inch, which is an F10, the aperture, to become an F6.3, which is, in very simple terms, allows you to capture more light more quickly, thus getting you a signal per noise ratio as you get images. All right, so we're hanging out here at Aristarchus, and actually just gonna hit record for a second, get some more footage. You can see the whole southern portion. Yeah, not enough contrast tonight or yesterday, but I think like in a couple of nights, especially now with like a little bit of this haze, it's doing its thing. So yeah, F6.3 focal reducer and a good camera. You know, the first cameras that I started with, the A6000, Sony A6000s, are like $400 at this point or less, and you can get you can start there, and it's really, I mean, yeah, there are other things, you know, really, if you're doing imaging, it's a whole other story. There are these ASI cameras that are cooled, and you can get into a whole world of different cameras and such. If you're doing optic viewing, I think, yeah, I know what I was going to say. I was going to say that the 8-inch is perfect, but if you're if you're not in good skies, you can't really see it with the eyepiece. And if you want to see things with an eyepiece, you're going to probably need a diagonal that's decent, and you're going to probably need to go to a dark sky site. But the 8-inch is basically powerful enough to do the work, but it's not going to cut through, really any telescope is not going to really cut through urban pollution and atmosphere to get visual sights of anything past. I mean, you could probably see Andromeda, and you can probably see M42 in Orion with an optical piece and telescope. And if you get in a 6-inch refractor, Zachary Sitchin refractor, 4-inch or 6-inch, you kind of you get a wider view of the sky, more light coming in faster. You get to possibly see some nebular clouds and formations with those smaller scopes. and as far as I can tell. But mostly, if you're in a dark sky, pretty much any telescope will start capturing deep sky objects. I think that's, I hope that answers your question. What's up, watching me, watching you? Oh, right, sorry. You said it looks blue. I thought you just joined. All right, I'm getting fuzzy over here because I'm getting hungry. Oh, that was me on the keyboard. I was like, what is that noise? That's pretty cool. Rainsong, I live in the Valley of California in a small town that has very little light pollution, so it's decent skies, but it could be better. Yeah, so the focal reducer is good to take images, you know. It's not gonna work with a diagonal. So maybe if you wanna do optical viewing, you're gonna get the diagonal first, and maybe a light pollution filter. And if you're doing camera stuff, then I would recommend getting the F6.3 and maybe a Televue 2X Barlow lens. That's probably the first couple of purchases. So the filter, the Televue, and the diagonal. And that would probably get you closer to, especially if you have decent skies, you can probably see certain galaxies maybe. On good nights, you'll see Andromeda for sure and M42, and then you'll probably see, I don't know, 5 to 6 other Messier objects, a couple of NGC galaxies with the naked eye. Not naked eye, but like optically. I don't know, DSO is like an extremely deep pun. Like, I wanted to really get into it, but you have to learn how to do the stacking and take images all night, and you need to get multiple cameras to track different stars, and you have to polar align. If you're, this whole setup that I have near my window, it's not something that I can really typically, polar align and set up all this tracking that you would need to actually get these deep sky shots that some of these people get on, APOD, Astro Picture of the Day. But the people who can, that are using those, like there's some mounts that are like $10,000, $20,000. What is it, the mighty MYT mount? Just like some crazy stuff. It's perfect. And you can just stack all these images, and so you take very, very, very low light, low ISO, like 30-second exposures, 60-second exposures, and you stack them in these programs. And some of the programs are so advanced now that they can turn the scope on and off, open and close your roof, take all the images, stack them, and give you like a perfectly produced deep sky image that's, like Hubble worthy. But to get really deep and get into that is just like so much work and money. And those guys who are doing it really well, it takes a lot of work. It's not just like a Photoshop thing. You get into this whole other software, especially if you're going to do it correctly, and everything needs updating, everything needs Windows. Yeah. The Astro Imaging channel is really great, though, if you guys are interested in that and you want to, it's really the peak of the guys who can do it are in that channel. My frame rate is 30 FPS, and it looks green, so not a lot of frames dropped tonight, thankfully. But I think I can upgrade the software on this capture card to be 60 FPS, but the camera won't. I think the camera does actually put 60 FPS 4K, but I think the bandwidth is just being able to right now like handle this. this year will be like regulating and everything will be in 4K and everyone can access 4K. And then next year you'll start being able to do the 60 FPS 4K and probably maybe some 8K things, but I doubt you're going to be able to stream 8K anytime soon. And 60 FPS I think is just, it's not unnoticeable, but I think you're going to drop so many frames that it will start looking kind of funny. I feel like 24 to 30 FPS is the most natural looking frame rate. I mean, if you guys have, you probably have seen like all those new movies in 4K and 60 FPS that just look too weird. They just feel weird and too realistic. George Kawasaki says, right, rack in tight on Tico, given seeing, but looks decent with the dark ejected donut and all the other things. Yeah, sure. Let me see, maybe I'll switch to the 8-inch real quick and get a little bit more viewing. What do we got here? It's about 2:30. Shall I do it? What shall I do? Yes. All right, let's get, I'll switch up the 8-inch. We'll see a little bit more of the moon and do a Tico zoom. Let's put some jam on. Jam on the bread. Intermission. set up this 8-inch right here. It's looking nice, actually. So this scope is just a little bit wobblier, a little wibbly wobbly, but it's looking nice. Here we go. That's pretty crispy. Pretty crispy. Let's see what's going on in the chat. George Kawasaki says frame rate, right? Looking through the eyepiece. That was earlier. It says then I'll start debate about those two perfectly. I was like, oh, are you asking about that? Or is that just me? Exactly. How is that butter stain happening on the moon? What the hell is it? I don't know. Like, did it roll off? It looks like somebody smudged it. Listen, at least if I'm wrong that it's something like, I don't even think it's nefarious. I just think it's really interesting. It should be like one of those things that we discuss about space. Like, what are these two amazing features? Actually, not just, of course, the rays coming off of Tycho. That's probably like 10th on my list of important things on the moon. Definitely start with Aristarchus. I'm not doing like 10-to-1, I'm doing like maybe top down. So I think primary focus would be Aristarchus formation and brightness and Schroeder's Valley. I think after that would be the structure around Copernicus, like all the different like tendrils that are coming out, and just like how why is it so big? What impact would it have to have been in order to create that? Was it a volcano? Are those tunnels? Is it icy? Is it layered? Like how deep into the mare are we seeing? Because sometimes it looks so dimensional, like you can see beyond these features at a certain angle, and it wouldn't be anything beyond scope. So probably Copernicus, and then probably Tycho crater itself would be after that. And then let's see, I guess it would be fourth or fifth on the list. I guess Kepler is really interesting. And then maybe the fifth would be the trifecta kind of setup over here of Copernicus, Kepler, and Aristarchus. And then I would go to Sinus Iridum, Bay of Rainbows, and then follow up that whole area with Plato crater, and then that little chicken foot, Montes, Tenerife, and Pico, and those little like isolated mountain ranges. Wait, did another plane just happen? I was looking down. Man, I'm gonna have to go back and look at all these different spots. I'll timestamp it maybe tomorrow. If you guys could explore one feature of the moon, what would it be? If you had like an expedition, or you can name top 3 most important feature or like interest areas, points of interest on the moon. I could keep going with Proclus and Mare Crisium, and then this whole Langrenus area with the way it gets smoothed out. Two birds vision. Killing two birds with one vision. George says, yeah, Kepler, like what a 2-mile wide paintball would look like splattered at 10 miles per second. Love to see it. I would love to see it on that scale. Like, in fact, it would be great to even just see that that whole NASA, how the moon was formed video updated to really do detailed formations of all these different, or like, you know, the videos of how these features would be formed in sort of a more macrocosmic detail. Right now they kind of do that kind of wide shot of the moon, you know, fully zoomed out, kind of swirling in 3D, and they kind of add the features by masking them in and sort of fading them in over time. But it'd be great to see like what they actually think Aristarchus, like how Aristarchus was formed. Like was it just like a floating island in a sea of volcanic lava? I think maybe we can zoom in now. To my question earlier, which parts would you explore? Mary says the backside. Vision says if landing, the very bottom. So like the southern areas now. Dang. Hold on. Let's set this. The Gassendi, yeah, exactly. Copernicus Gassendi, and then the Hyginus volcanic area, says George Kalasowski. Vision, do you mean like the very bottom of the screen right now? So like that isn't that a Gassendi crater? No. I think it is though. No, it's not, no. This is, what crater is this? Come on, memory, work. I think this is like, this is Grimaldi crater. All right, do you mean this area, Vision? Rainsong says, isn't there an area where people say you can see a pipe-like structure sticking out? Well, like having, you know, going through all the different phases, if you follow the Terminator line shadow, especially during the waning phase, well, early waning, early crescent, early waxing, you'll get a lot of features that look like that on the very Terminator line. So lots of, there's nothing very, I don't think there's anything particular. If you think this, if you're talking about the sword, there's Huygens sword, which is like a valley rift, almost like this long feature with a hilt cross section. Oh yeah, I was gonna go make a point. Actually, got some crap on the lens, I can tell. I think there's a new little dirt donut on the scope right now. Oh, this is the 8-inch, of course. I was like, damn, what happened to the 11? I hope it didn't get dirty. All right, so getting back here to Aristarchus. Yeah, George, what I'm thinking is like just the feature itself, like to the left, the plateau. It's so well defined, and you know, just did it emanate from the blast site, from Aristarchus blast, for example? Is that how you envision it? Or do you feel like there was the plateau and then there's another impact after that that specifically landed at that one corner? And then what do you postulate in terms of Herodotus and how that leads into the Schroeder's Valley and kind of doesn't really have a volcanic mouth? Vision says it would be right from that perspective. So let's see. Well, give me a feature to check on. George says by the time Aristarchus hit, maybe 800 million years ago, Mari there was pretty cooled. Hard highlands, hence the very silicated, glassy crater wall from the hard impact fusion. Okay, hard highlands, hence... trying to understand this for real. Aristarchus hit. So you mean Aristarchus hit like just the corner. Maybe 800 million years ago, Mari there was pretty cooled, so the area around it. Hard highlands. I'm not, I guess, okay. Hence that very silicated glassy crater wall from the hard impact fusion. So just random, so your assumption is that the crater hit after that kind of shape was already there, the plateau. Vision says 2 o'clock. Okay, so like north of Tycho. Like right around this area. Yo, what's up, Authentic Max? How you doing? George says the plateau says would have likely been older highlands that were literally sandblasted away from catastrophic impacts of Herodotus and Ari. Okay. Yeah, I know, but I guess would likely been older highlands that were literally sandblasted away. I don't know, maybe. maybe it's entirely possible that sandblasting can happen on the moon the same way it can happen on Earth. But, you know, sandblasting would require a certain type of pressure, I guess. Wouldn't sandblasting have to be, well, I don't know. It depends on really the atmosphere and the pressure density on the surface of the moon. And it also really, like, it's been measured, but the moon does have a very strong magnetic field. And I really wonder what happens. They've talked about levitating dust on the surface of the moon, so there is some sort of field around, and it probably is stronger in some areas of the moon. So I would assume there are certain parts, maybe like where Aristarchus is, and Tycho, maybe not Tycho, but maybe like Proclus, where there are very energetic magnetic spots that excite the gases in the atmosphere and create these white points that we see everywhere. Or it's just ice. I don't know. Lots to speculate. George says, really? Imagine building a sandcastle on the beach and then 3 feet away. Yeah, but I'm saying that the Earth and the moon don't have the same atmosphere on the surface. I mean, in fact, just, you know, lowering, you know, making the idea that the Earth has less gravity than the Earth and kind of making that a throwaway statement is also something I've kind of grown to challenge, because it's really incredible. Like, I mean, if we landed or if we didn't land, doesn't matter. The idea that you can stand on another body and that whole surface interacts differently with particles and dust and coagulation and wind. Same thing with Mars. I mean, I'm not necessarily, I kind of I'm trying to move away from the idea of Earth-centric principles affecting all bodies in the solar system, which is how science is now approached. Maybe it's right, but extrapolating data that way doesn't really allow for new concepts to exist, and this is not something that's really truly discussed about the moon in common moon science. Specific features on the moon are rarely discussed by name, and they're rarely discussed in terms of, like, we went there and we solved this one particular thing about this particular region. George says, no, strongly. I meant the sheer pressure of an impact a few miles away with shrapnel flying at 10, 5, and 15 miles per second, like when you throw a snowball. Sure. No, I've thrown a snowball at a wall. before for sure, but it's not that that's not possible. It's just that the sheer impact of something that large, let's just look at the size of Aristarchus crater. It's just that the damage doesn't seem to be, the damage seems to be localized is what I'm saying. It seems like carving and leaving debris in its place in a way, almost pulverizing it, versus having debris strewn about the lunar atmosphere. Features like Aristarchus, for example, are 40 kilometers across and about 3,000 feet, 9,000 feet tall or deep. So that's a lot of ejecta that you don't really see on the surface. So yeah, it could have been pulverized, it could have been strewn back into there are a lot of speculations around how that happened, but it's the same thing with Mars too. Valles Marineris is a huge amount of space and a huge amount of ejecta that is not really accounted for in the public scientific record. But the fact that it could have been blasted out by a giant arc bolt and strewn, and that's essentially what we have is this I forget what it's called, but there's an asteroid belt that is unaccounted for, and you could link these two things. Sorry, I'm getting fried. George says, I'm getting lost, but if there's a 1 mile mountain 3 miles away and a 2 mile impactor hits, sure. I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that it looks particularly alive right now, and it's worth looking into as to the formation of it. So because we're both, like, I'm speculating, and I don't know if you know for sure, but maybe you know exactly how Aristarchus was formed. So I could take your word for it. But for me, I think it's such an interesting feature that there should be some more study into it, like public record stuff. The same thing with Kepler. We can just look at Kepler too, which is a really fascinating, if it's an impact strike, like it's said to be, it's really amazing. It doesn't make it less interesting if it's impact cratering for me. It's just, if it's settled science that it's impact craters, then why aren't there exact understandings of all of these things? You should just be able to extrapolate the data from small experiments and create exactly what you see on the moon, but you can't. But with electric arcing, you actually create exactly things like Copernicus. So. Oniaris Burns, are those ley lines? Joking. Thanks for the live stream, enjoying it immensely. Thank you. I'm about winding down here, just as long as I got the view for another 30 minutes. I'm enjoying having this conversation because this is what I think about. Like, I'm open to it being exactly the way Apollo and NASA say the moon is. I'm open to it. It just doesn't seem like we take these features seriously enough. I mean, these features are like, I mean, how many documentaries and pictures and stuff about the Grand Canyon do we have? And how many discussions about all these features on Earth? And yet we can see Copernicus from like a living room, you know, in this kind of detail pretty much regularly. And there aren't scientific debates or streams from science shows like Neil deGrasse Tyson or these guys talking about the moon. And the moon is essentially responsible for life, tides, any number of things. There's a whole litany of reasons to be interested or to discuss the moon in greater detail. And I'm not sitting here trying to argue about, impact pressure or whether ballistics can prove all these features right. What I'm trying to say is that, like, this feature Tycho or Tycho crater and then the whole formation inside Mare Imbrium is worth like full-on documentaries and science shows dedicated to what it is, because that's like real science stuff. Like, there's so many like made-up documentaries about all this fake stuff. It's not fake. I don't mean to use that word lightly. I just mean like hyper-stylized versions of space when we have actual imagery of space that scientists could talk about that is really interesting. Does that make sense? George is going through damage almost everywhere. The moon seems localized because the horizon curves rapidly. I mean localized as in like the actual features seem cut out and the debris seems to not exist. Or it seems to have been flung out into space to some degree and we don't really have record of that. If you look up like impact blasts on the moon, what you're saying sounds like what I've heard before, but there aren't actual records or video explanations from scientists about these things, especially for the large features like Tycho, Copernicus, Kepler, and Aristarchus. It's just not out there. Yeah, there's an LRO fly-through that is stitched together images from the LRO flying into Aristarchus, and it's 1:40 long. And this, I don't know, to me, these features are way more important than a minute-long image sequence from a satellite, you know? Nobody talking about it, nobody referencing the history of it, nobody talking about the record of the moon, no one talking about the debris, no one talking about Mare Imbrium or what these names are. So, George says, Tycho and Copernicus and Kepler were big enough to see where some of them some of the less than 1 mile per second, aka orbital plume, came back down. The rest left the building. Yeah, I know, but that's... okay, sure. That's not necessarily wrong, but I don't know. I can't necessarily visualize that either. And I don't know how to say this, but really, like, I'll say it again, essentially. I'm not really trying to find the exact answer as to how these things occurred. What I'm saying is that I'd like to talk more about how these things occurred. And to me, they have these very interesting features that could be, I think, simulated in a laboratory. And you look at the Sapphire projects, and you look at Billy Elverton's channel, and you look at, there's another channel where he's doing electrical discharge in a vacuum container, and it looks just like these features. And there's no reason for that. And you can also create dunes, and you can also create features like Olympus Mons, and you create flat top mountains, and you create all these different things using electric discharge. So this idea that, okay, so let's say they're impact craters, then is that, the idea is, behind that is that we should never look further into these features on the moon. Is that the implication behind wanting to just decide that they're impact craters and they're a certain age and they're a certain depth and they're a certain size and that's it forever and ever, and then we die and we move on through the generations and never potentially gather any more information about these craters because that's the settled science? You know what I'm saying? Is that feels like the implication here. All I'm trying to say is that it looks interesting. If it's really impact craters, let's create it with ballistics and measure these effects, and or have a science show dedicated to how the moon features were formed with like logical hypotheses and renders that made sense. Yeah. Agreed. Tides, life, and yes, go right now and eyeball Copernicus and Tycho. Yeah. I know. I mean, also like, if for nothing else, just the curiosity of it. There are so many shows where like there are people talking about, you know, either we didn't land or did land, or making fun of moon, people who don't believe we went to the moon, and belittling people. It's really not about looking at the moon and saying, well, here's a geologist who knows, you know, how to interpret the record. And if Apollo brought back all these samples, you know, I mean, this cat who does moon conspiracy stuff, Jarrah White, moon faker stuff, like he actually went and got a degree in geology, I think, and wants to study astrophysics, and actually did all this lunar soil analysis, right? Like that's the type of science that should really exist around this, but we're in 2019, Jarrah White still exists and makes videos. Like NASA still makes simulated versions of this using real or not real data, doesn't really matter. It's more about the way it's treated. It's treated like mythos and storytelling versus just looking at the actual thing, which we're doing now. I mean, it's something so stupidly simple in a way, that we're staring at this thing, but we're just, It's not stupid, it's stupidly simple. Anyway, getting some really nice detail around the Aristarchus region, speaking of which. George is continuing the conversation here. I jumped over a couple. Mary says, so the moon must have magnetism. Mary must have magnetism. Yes, the moon, I would venture to say it does have magnetism. I could even say I believe it has magnetism, but it feels like it does. It seems like it affects the Earth physically. Vicky says, do they have a reason why the mares are darker? Well, the idea is that it was all highlands, right? So all the brighter regions, and then there was a bombardment period that blasted out essentially this giant region, the Oceanus Procellarum region, which is that encompasses Mare Humoris, Mare Imbrium, and what's the other one? Mare Nubium, and yeah, and then and the three major features we're talking about, and then Mare Imbrium, Sea of Serenity, Mare Serenitatis, Tranquillitatis, and then you get to Sea of Fecundity and Mare Crisium. I mean, Mare Crisium looks anomalous in a way because of the way it kind of feels like it has its own basin. Little birdie just passed by. Yeah. So see, and then interestingly, two features that I didn't mention earlier are essentially the different soil compositions of the mare of Sea of Tranquility and Sea of Serenity. Particularly Sea of Tranquility having such a dark bluish tone to it, indicating some probably increased amount of a certain type of metallic element. Possibly titanium, but I'm not sure. And George Kalasowski says moon has definitely some gravity variances. The iron nickel, right? Mascons, the big 500, 200 mile impact that hit Imbriums et al. Let's see, I'm just trying to read through this stuff. Right, so Vicky, yeah, so these areas got impacted and blasted out, and then it filled up with lava, I assume, is what because the moon was still young, and I guess it still had a hot molten core, is why the lava emanated from underneath the high grounds after this giant impact period, and then it cooled, and then it went through another impact phase, but the record really doesn't have a reason for this secondary impact, this epoch, or whatever, it could be the whole, I'm just thinking out, sorry, I'm fuzzying out because I'm thinking about Mars right now, but there is, what is it, there's a greater bombardment phase, a later bombardment phase, I forget, but that's in question, essentially. There's a debate about whether this later bombardment phase was necessary or could be proven or not. But essentially, yeah, so these basins filled up with lava or hot lunar clay and then cooled, and then they're different compositions, probably based on the magnetic flux of the moon and the way deposits flow. And so this is why they're assumed why they're darker. What's up, Copper Chops? How you doing? How are the koi? I hope they're doing well. I definitely have cotton mouth, you can tell. I know I'm drinking iced tea here, which is making me having more cotton mouth. Pucker. All right. George says lighter serenity is iron basalt below, and right, as you can see just there, is darker titanium. Yeah, I think I was reading that as well. Anyway, a lot of interesting stuff to talk about on the moon. And then, in a larger sense, there's the entire tracking of different features on the moon through the phases, which allows for a greater discussion, I think, in detail of, like, even if they're features that we know where, like Huygens sword or Proclus, for example, formation of that, why it's so bright, how it looks because at certain phases you can really go deep on Proclus and Aristarchus and pretty much all of them. In Tycho, there are certain phases where you can see right up inside it. And I guess the other thing about the electric version of it, where it's carved out, you have this uncommon number of craters, or pretty much all these craters have these central peaks that are unaccounted for in ballistics, at least reliable. So there's this reliable there's this reliable feature set that happens where you have craters on the rim of other craters, you have chains of craters, and you have central peaks. All of which are good debates to have about, the formation of craters. Perhaps certain types of impacts would create central peaks, but there's something about a lot of these, especially like Posidonius or Eratosthenes or Theophilus, with very, very sharp, well-defined central peaks that resemble each other, like tri-formations and small formations of micro-mountains right in the middle of these flat plane surfaces. Let's see. Wild Vicky's saying, I'm liking the micronova from our sun as looking like a good hypothesis. Copper says the koi is still sleeping. Boring. George says, and look at the center of your moonshot right there, the circle of 4 to 5 dark spots just there. Very old volcanic and somewhat radioactive there. So yeah, actually that's another thing that I've been looking for and I couldn't really find. Maybe you've seen it before, but what was, did they do radiation measurements on the surface of the moon? Because I didn't see a lot of that in my research. I've looked a lot for those records. A lot of fossil samples and how the rocks reacted and how the radiation from the surface and the soil, but I guess maybe I don't know enough about that. What is my favorite phase of the moon, says Sensei Camilo. For me, I think it's a tie between like first quarter and 23% waning crescent. Like a really nice first quarter in the southern skies with clear skies is really amazing because you can see the first really clear shot of where you're about to lose Earthshine, so you get really that amazing like split coin view. And then the 23% waning crescent, which is usually at like 3:04 in the morning, you get what I think is probably the coolest shot of Aristarchus. Really, really deep relief. You get an extremely sharp view of Herodotus and Schroeder's Valley. And then you get to see, Kepler is also amazing there. Like, those two features really rock at that level. Those are probably my two phases. Yeah, George was saying, yes, good question about my radioactive, how radioactive is the surface of the moon or the atmosphere, or like being on the surface? Were they exposed to radiation further, like from the actual, I'm sure they were exposed to radiation based on, solar, wind, and, space radiation, but the moon itself must have its own radiation because, that would seem like it should, especially if there was a hot molten core, and if the moon's really old, there must be some type of remnant radioactivity from the early formation. It would seem, but perhaps not. If the moon lost all its nitrogen and its atmosphere a long time ago, it's possible that the radiation has become neutralized. Got a little dim over here. It's about to hit I got the 8-inch kind of low to the ground, so it's getting a nice sharp slew right now. I'm trying to get the moon. I guess we got like another 10-15 minutes here. It's good, it lasted pretty long. Yo, what's up, Kenneth Cantu? How you doing? Yeah, another bird. We got a bunch of birds and planes tonight. Lots of talking. The music gone again. Since Camilla says electric moon mining can't recreate with ballistics, but can recreate with mining. Yeah, I guess the fact of the matter is impacts are not precluded, are not excluded from, I guess you could basically have electric scarring and you could also have impact craters. I don't think one precludes the other, essentially. So I could be, to say that there's absolutely no way that electric scarification happened on the moon seems to dismiss what could be a really great discovery just outright. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And further, that there's no real settled view on the moon formation, even though there's a commonly agreed upon accretion theory. There are still people working on it. I saw something recently where this one was working on a completely different model. And similarly, I'm not sure how much research you've done, but I've seen research done on accretion disk coagulation of matter, and it would seem like that doesn't really actually work, or at least we don't have physical examples where we can see that happening. I gotta say, Black Knight satellite is just such a great marketing term. It's just a sticky title. Actually, let me check out some more of these texts that I wanted to read tonight, see what else I have pulled up. Yeah, what up there, Kind Butler? How's it going? Yo, what up, Kevin John? Yeah, George, I guess we've hit this impasse before, my man. It's all good. Everyone is free to be. Oh, kindly is from South Florida, Tampa, Florida. George says, remember, a 30-mile crater had its center peak pushed down 10 miles before rebound back up to the Mare level. Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to be dismissive, but yeah, I guess we're gonna have to disagree about that. or not disagree, I'd like to be open to the fact that it possibly was carved. Because it allows for us to actually put things together. Otherwise, there's this speculative nature to the formation of the moon that is going to be perpetual. So either it's correct or it's not, you know? So if it's correct, if the hypothesis is correct, then there should be an entire documentary that should say, hey, well, we figured out exactly how these features were done. This is the documentary that says the moon was formed this way. You know, not saying that I need that. I don't care if they do that, but I'm saying there should be if that's the case. But where we sit today is, if you look up how the moon was formed, it's still not really thoroughly talked about or presented in a way that makes sense. Nor are the key features on the moon. I mean, I feel like I'm also repeating myself, and I don't mean to sound patronizing in any way. I mean, just look at Kenneth and George. I don't know if you probably just dismissed Electric Universe offhand without like really looking into it, but it's worth looking into Too Tough To, Billy Elverton's channel, where he actually just has laboratory experiments blasting things with 70,000 volts and with little metallic plates on clay and sand and dirt, and you can create what looks exactly like Copernicus in the laboratory today using very simple tools. And if you look up NASA formation of Copernicus crater, you won't really find anything. It's a rabbit hole that I've tried to look down, that I've spent many nights trying to find out if we have reports, if we have studies or papers or teachers or astronomers that talk about this stuff, and it just doesn't exist. Now, if you want to tell me that you're sitting here in my chat room and you know all these answers and you're certain of them, then I'm willing to listen. But at the same time, I have my own questions about it, and it seems like it's very likely that there is a certain type of part of space that we still have to learn about, and there's parts of the moon that we have to learn about, and I don't think it's settled science. So it feels like I have links in my description of the video, guys. At the very bottom, there are links to specific things like what I'm talking about, like just like metallic plate discharge and shaking little plates with sand in a certain way with a certain vibration, create sand dunes, create craterlets, create like chains of craters, create like craters on the rims of craters, the preferential treatment of that. It creates the central peaks. It's very easy. It replicates the ionosphere and Earth and the interaction between planets. And public science says that there were bombardment phases where tons of matter smashed into the moon in particular patterns and created all these things. Now, granted, we do have ballistics and we do have volcanic activity that could have happened. For example, the moon could have been heated and these could be blisters. There could be a lot of reasons for it, but I think it's not something that really should be settled and just said, hey, this is exactly how ballistics work. All the craters were formed this way. Every crater has a central peak that's really defined based on ballistics, which I don't see videos of creating these particular types of impacts. It's very inconsistent, and you get a slightly different type of rim. And further than that, you don't get craters on the rims of other craters preferentially using ballistics or impact methodology. So I don't know where that discussion came. It doesn't, I'm not trying to also attack either. So anyway, let's just agree to disagree. That's fine. Maybe this is time to call it, y'all. I appreciate everybody very much for hanging out tonight. It's been a good conversation, but I'm getting like zonked, and I should probably eat something. Damn, I was gonna eat dinner like an hour ago. George, total respect and thanks for the conversation. I hope y'all enjoyed the show tonight. I had a good full moon session. Got deep, got real deep. Hope everybody has a great rest of your night. I'll catch you on the next stream, possibly tomorrow or the day after. Maybe try and get the 23% waning crescent this session. I think birds basically just dive bombed the moon and created all these craters. These big ass pelicans. Appreciate all the new people coming in. There are links in the description of the video, and there's like a really large number of archived videos that are, I have playlisted some of them. So if you're new to the channel and you want to see like flybys and transits and like the eclipses that have happened in the last couple of years, you can check out old playlists. And check out my music on the links as well. Muchas gracias to my regulars. Thanks for hanging out so long. I hope you appreciated the discussion and check out the Somnium book, huh? It's pretty trippy. Vicky, peace. Ellie, thanks so much. Nice to see you. George, I appreciate it. Kenneth as well. Kind Butler, peace. Sensei Camilla, Copper Chops. I saw Watching Me, Watching You. Onus Burns, Authentic Max, Rain Song. I'll do this one. Closing song, Light of the Moon. Peace and love, everybody. I'm out. Street.